will turn it over to you.
You know what helps for people to hear you is taking yourself off of mute. Works every time. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Milton. I'll be one of your facilitators. Today, we're gonna ask that you start by completing the pre-workshop survey. You can utilize your phone using your QR code, take a picture of it, or you can utilize the link. I don't know if it's in the chat. Do you all need me to send it so it can be in the chat?
I can do that, Nicole, no worries.
Okay, thank you. So while we're waiting for all the many fans to come and join us to see our wonderful faces, we're gonna play a little music, if that's okay with everyone, while we wait for people to join us and complete the pre-survey. Good to go?
Nicole, I filled out my survey on the phone and then it led me into Zoom. Is that okay?
Yes, I think that should be fine. Okay.
I'm not perfect, I came from ruthless times as a juvenile. Look into my eyes, see pain and sacrifice. Monsters on my mind, struggling to survive. Jerusalem, Ikayalami, Ilondoloze, Ambenami, Zungangishilana, Jerusalem, Ikayalami, Ilondoloze, Ambenami, Zungangishilana. I'm not perfect, I came from ruthless times as a juvenile.
All righty, hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to complete their pre-survey. If there's anyone who needs more time, besides the person who just joined us in the room, could you give us a thumbs up or indicate that you need more time? Okay, go ahead and complete that pre-survey, the person who just joined us, and we're gonna move forward. We'll do some quick introductions of ourselves and kind of give you an overview of how this is going to flow. Okay, boom. All right, so Sharifa and I will be conducting your training. We also have a special guest by the name of Cecilia Heft, who is our everything. She's the center, the rock of our team. We could not move, breathe, and do what we do without her. So Cecilia, since you are the cornerstone of our team, can you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Cecilia Heft. I am the program coordinator with the Center for School Behavioral Health at Mental Health America of Greater Houston. We are really excited to be here with you all. We did a self-care burnout training with AFT in December, and it was really great. We really enjoyed training with you all. We had a great audience, lots of participation. So thank you all so much for having us again. My co-host today will be my dog, PETA, who is ready for mom to stop staring at the computer and also to share her snacks. So if you hear random rogue barking, that is just her trying to say hello.
Thank you, Cecilia and PETA. Hopefully you get a little snack soon. Without further ado, let me introduce my other coworker, my esteemed colleague, Sharifa J. Charles.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Sharifa Charles. I have been with the Center for School Behavioral Health at Mental Health America of Greater Houston for around 2 years. I made 2 years last week. It's been an absolute pleasure and absolute great work. That's a weird sentence, but you know what I'm trying to say. A little bit about me is I was born and raised on the island of St. Lucia. I am Caribbean born. I identify as West Indian, Afro-West Indian. I lived in Minnesota for a chunk of my time on this planet, and Texas for another chunk. So I have a mixed up accent. I also will eat curry, tacos, and hot dish all in the same day, okay? So very culturally diverse. I consider myself a public health trainer. I've always done some health related training in very non-traditional settings. I'm often adjacent to education systems. So it's also a pleasure to be here. I respect and honor anyone who works in the education system. And last but not least, a fun fact about me, I absolutely adore docuseries. My colleagues know that not a conversation could go by without me giving some kind of recommendation. It doesn't really matter what they're talking about. It could be chocolate or true crime. I actually was watching The Night Stalker. There's a new docuseries on The Night Stalker, all that jazz that happened in Cali, all that stuff, right? So anyway, so if you need recommendations, I'm here. I'm trying to come up with a cool name for being a docuseries enthusiast. Unlike Nicole, who has a cool name for her vice, I do not yet. So if there's any suggestions, please holla, okay? But it's a pleasure to be here with you all this evening.
All right, Sharifa, you sell yourself short. Like, you have all the cool names and you like all the cool stuff. Without further ado, I'll introduce myself. My name is Nicole Milton. I'm a former science teacher. Okay, so I taught middle school science and HISD, loved it. I am a strong relationship builder. I just have the ability, I'm that person that could walk into the store and make a friend without, that wasn't even my intention, but I think I just have one of those faces, even with my mask. And I call myself a philomath because I had to look up the word. I'm like, what does it mean for people who just like to learn things? And that's exactly what that is. A philomath is someone who just loves to learn things. So I saw it on Google and I, just kind of added it to my intro. So here we are. So hopefully we will have a great time this evening. Sharifa and I are, they call us freaking frack, 2 peas in a pod, whatever, we're just calamity, but always purposeful and a good time. So thank you all for being here with us. In the spirit of being front loading, you're going to hear my voice and Sharifa's voice while we are going to also toggle between sharing screens, or if Sharifa, if you don't mind, I can advance for you. I have no problem with that. Also, when one of us is speaking, you probably won't see the other one's face. And we simply do that so that you can pay attention to the screen and not be bothered like by our faces and kind of get into the content and material. And it's also helpful for us. And we utilize each other. Cecilia, Sharifa, and I've been working together for almost 2 years now. And so we kind of understand how to like cue and signal each other. So if you're having any issues, please feel free to privately message us. We'll be here along with Jamie and Hannah. Okay, so I'm gonna turn it over to Sharifa. Take us through the things, ma'am.
Fantastic. So just to get started, we've done introductions already. You kind of learned a little bit about us. And so we would like to take advantage of learning a little bit about you. So if you can take a moment and open up the chat box, and we would like you to include the information that you see on this slide. So your name, organization, right? And then also we would love to hear why you're here today and what would you like to find out and learn about suicide prevention. So let's take a few minutes. Let's get in that chat. That's another way of interacting with us. If there's someone who, for some reason, maybe you are on the move, okay? You are scurrying home or you just had to stop by the grocery store, you can unmute yourself. But for everybody else, let's go ahead in the chat and share that information. Thank you, everyone. Let's take a few minutes. Let us know who's here. I can sense the fingers are.
There are going to be some good introductions. They're probably putting PhD,
yes,
and all the things behind their name.
Yes, I can also feel some nicknames. Someone trying to share some childhood nicknames. I can feel it. I can feel it in my spirit. Let us know what your name, organization. Don't think too much about it. It doesn't have to be too complex. We just want to know, why are you joining us on a wonderful Wednesday evening, a cold evening, as well as, what would you like to know? How would you like to expand your thinking? All right, Miss Alana, thank you so much for starting us out. Anyone else? Okay, so that is Nicole's way of telling me, let's move forward. So Miss Alana, thank you so much for letting us know why you're here. I'm sure many people feel the same way. Shout out to you being a science teacher, amen, hallelujah. A virtual academy, we know that work is awesome, especially considering what's happening in our time. And just really looking at the signs, right, to know what happens, to kind of, so you can anticipate when it's getting to a critical point. So that's definitely you thinking from a preventative mindset, and we are all about that, right? Oftentimes, there are some things that we can look for in our young people to tell us that they may be dealing with a crisis. So thank you so much for that. We can advance the slide. Thank you, Nicole. So this workshop is presented for information purposes only. While there is no guarantee that your work today or in the future will save lives, it is built upon research related to best practices of suicide prevention gatekeeper training and has been developed in alignment with these protocols. none of the organizations or workshop leaders assume or convey any warranty of effectiveness, outcomes, reductions in suicide deaths, or attempt or adverse workshop outcomes. It is not being delivered in the context of a mental health training or clinical care. So we just want to make you aware of those things. We are all here simply to really examine the best practices and see that we have pulled it together. The Texas Suicide Council has pulled it together. And so that's what we want to convey to you. We just simply want to empower you to feel better able to take care of the young people in your life, okay? So right now, when we're thinking about creating a safe space and an informative workshop, we recognize that this is hard work and it is a very difficult topic. So those who may have been exposed to trauma, suicide loss, lived experience, or similar experiences may find today's discussion difficult. When you are leaving the room, perhaps you need to take a second, please let one of us know. You have a variety of choices. You can tell Miss Hannah, Miss Jamie, Miss Cecilia, or Miss Nicole, depending on who's talking, and let us know if you are okay, if we can kind of assist you in another way, okay? But just let us know. You don't have to tell the whole group, but you can privately message us and we want to check in with you, okay? This workshop is not designed to be delivered by a clinical care provider. We want to make that distinction. And it is not designed to serve to diagnose, screen, treat, or otherwise provide counsel for any mental or physical health condition. So what we say is you get a certificate, you do not get a cape, okay? We're just raising our awareness and our understanding. And so, yeah. And then please feel free to reach out to either myself or someone else if you have any questions or concerns. We will have a break and we'll be more than happy to assist you. You want to advance the slide? Thank you. So just looking at the agenda, just so you know what we'll be doing as we hang out for the next hour or so, we're going to do, obviously right now we're doing the introduction and just the overview. Then we're going to look at epidemiology of suicide, public health approach to suicide prevention, the AS+K model and practice. And then we're going to conclude doing evaluation if there's any outstanding questions, Q&A, sorry. And feel free, sometimes because it's such rich information, you may have a question that is just burning desire. Feel free to put that in the chat. There are enough people on this call that can assist you with answering. And if we do not have the answer, we ask for grace and that we can always get back to you as soon as possible, okay? Advance the slide. Today, we want to spend time learning about the things that you can and should do to help reduce the risk of suicidal behavior among people you are coming into contact with. First, it is helpful to know the basic information about suicide, risk and protective factors, as well as warning signs. And I know a lot of us come with a wealth of knowledge, so bear with us and kind of look for those things that maybe you weren't paying attention to before. Again, we're expanding our knowledge. Second, it is important to know what is expected of a gatekeeper and how gatekeeping skills fits into suicide prevention. Third, your potential to help someone at risk of suicide is dependent upon knowing that suicide can be prevented. Fourth, we will work to ensure that you are confident in your ability to act in the event you suspect someone may be at risk. And finally, know how to connect someone who may be at risk to qualified care. These are the skills that we will definitely be working on today. Next slide. The original AS curriculum was developed as a collaboration across a number of experts in public health and suicide prevention who are listed here. This updated and enhanced ASK is built off this best practices informed foundation and has expanded to include information that has recently emerged through newer research and information. So a lot of us, we have a tendency to come with a wealth of knowledge because we've been in the field or we've gone through other trainings, but it's really important to know whenever we're thinking about mental or behavioral health, things are constantly changing, okay? And so we wanna make sure that you have the most updated information. Something else to consider, gatekeeping training is designed to help key persons identify and refer persons who may be at risk for suicide. The purpose is to teach persons how to respond to suicidal behavior, express suicidal intent, and other crises that someone may be experiencing. So again, it goes back to that you're getting a certificate, not a CAPE, meaning that your certificate is an indicator of your wealth of knowledge, that you're familiar with the signs and symptoms, that you can kind of anticipate maybe the needs of whoever you are coming into contact with. But at the end of the day, it's truly about linking them to care. So unless you have that kind of training, clinical training, we do want you to know this is more about skill building and making sure that you can connect the person to the right place. Okay, so as we mentioned, the original AS curriculum is based on best practices for gatekeeper training. The original AS curriculum is listed on the SPRC resources and programs website. Over 400 trainers have been trained to deliver ASK. In addition, over 60,000 have watched the online version of ASK since August 2018, okay? Gatekeeper trainings including ASK can be adapted for special audiences such as youth, veterans, older populations, and the like. Numerous literature, reviews, and studies have found suicide prevention gatekeeper training as a promising practice when combined with larger systems approaches to suicide prevention. So don't feel, based on you being here, that, oh, maybe I'm not gonna get everything. It has been shown to be a very promising practice in conjunction with other things, okay? Next slide. In the context of our community, suicide prevention gatekeeper training is a valuable resource. Suicide prevention isn't just one thing. It takes effort across a number of strategies, systems, and participants to impact suicide prevention outcomes. Gatekeeper training sits at a critical juncture where community members interact on a daily basis. But gatekeeper training isn't the only solution. It is a part of a larger suicide safe care strategy that is needed across our communities. However, it is a place to start, elevating awareness of risk factors, warning signs, and protective factors to help identify persons who may be at risk and connect them to qualified care. There's a saying that's going around the American Association of Suicidology. Suicide prevention is everyone's business. And I think many of you all would agree. Anyone who's interacting at any level with other people, which means all of us, is likely to encounter someone who may be at risk for suicide at some point in their lives. The logic of the gatekeeper model is that adults who come into contact with persons at risk should know clearly what they should do if they encounter someone who might be suicidal. However, the model inherently assumes, as we discussed earlier about the suicide self-care systems, safe care systems and communities, that there are qualified and supportive services available and that a system is in place to enable the gatekeeper to make an appropriate referral and transfer care. So even after you've completed this training, know that you will have, whether you've brushed off some skills or gained some skills, we want to make sure that we're looking at systemic changes. So we want you all to be able to go back to your respective campuses and really examine, are there systems in place to better support not only the students, their families, as well as the other staff members that are on campus. The gatekeeper model assumes that persons who are at risk for suicide are more likely to be identified and more likely to receive effective care if a person trained as a gatekeeper has contact with them. So you being here is very, very important. Because it is believed that the heightened period of suicidality is often a short period of time, and we'll discuss this later today, any intervention during this period can be helpful. Think of suicide prevention gatekeeper training like CPR. So for audience members, if you were to have a heart attack, which city would you, this is an interesting question, okay? So everybody, you gotta get ready for that chat, get those fingers on fleek. In fact, there's a poll that should have popped up and we want you to go ahead and answer that, okay? If you were to have a heart attack, which city would where would you have the best chance of survival? So you have New York, Chicago, Miami, Seattle, or Houston.
I'm seeing 2 for Houston so far.
Okay.
Ooh, 3 for Houston. We love Houston. That's where we live. 1 for Seattle.
Anybody else?
Not so far.
Okay, so guess what? The answer for the one person for Seattle, you are correct. Woo, woo, woo. Like, woo, yeah. All my Houstonians, I know we're proud people, but dang it, it's Seattle, okay? The reason why Seattle is because the city offers the best chance of survival because it has the highest number of CPR trained residents per capita, okay? So that is why, because they have the highest number of CPR trained residents per capita. So think of it this way. The time that you are most likely to die from a heart attack is before you arrive at the hospital. If through CPR, we can keep people alive until qualified help arrives, the better the chances of survival are. That's how we think about suicide prevention gatekeeper training. The time someone is most likely to die by suicide is not when you are with a mental health professional, but when you are in your community. Okay, so we are going to, I believe in the chat, we're going to pose a question for you really quickly, and we want to know what you think about that. What do you think?
Ba-da-ba. Cecilia, I believe this is a poll question.
Yes, it is.
Is it the what does epidemiology even mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone, we're going to take another quick poll. What does epidemiology even mean? It's a big word. Some of us can't pronounce it properly. What does it even mean? Take a few seconds to vote.
And so while, it says it's closed.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so really, can we
Let
all
me see if I
see?
can relaunch it.
Okay,
There we go.
all right. So to give you context, the reason why we're asking this is because, shameless plug, I am about to take you into the epidemiology of suicide. Ooh.
Majority, and by majority, I mean everyone, so far is selecting the study of disease and prevention and other factors related to health.
Fantastic.
Cecilia, I'm going to end the poll there, if that's okay. All right. And do you know what the correct answer was?
It was the one y'all gave. Woo!
All right.
Is the study of
Epidemiology.
and other factors related to health. Awesome, everybody.
All right, so I'm going to take us through the epidemiology, but before that, do I have any data nerds in the house? I definitely am one. I love to know the information. So I'm going to speak to this facts and figures given to us by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. In 2018, over 48,000 Americans died by suicide. When estimated suicide attempt figures are added to that equation, it's easy to see how communities are impacted by suicide. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The cost for the US communities is staggering. The CDC estimated that their cost about $70 billion. If you can see that on the right side of the screen, between work loss and medical costs for suicide deaths. Firearms are the leading method, accounting for over 50% of deaths in the US, suicide deaths in the US, and rates are highest for non-Hispanic whites. And again, all of this information can be found at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So just to give you an idea of what that means, for a high school football stadium, I loved high school football. My school was not this big, okay? The average high school stadium seats about just under 4,000 people. So if we know that there were 48,000 deaths, that means that there were about 12 high school stadiums of people that died by suicide. And so that is the number that is averaged for the United States each year. So we know that this is something that is important, and we're like, the data helps us to understand and give us a little bit of grounding in the why this is important, and the impact of what happens if we don't do programs like this, where we kind of learn how to interact and how to do that preventative work. So the CDC Whiskers, which is so cute, but Whiskers stands for Web-Based Inquiry Statistics Query and Reporting System. So this is basically where they're getting all this information, and they indicate that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death across all ages and higher in these age groups. So working with students, we're looking at that 10 to about 24, still second leading cause of death among adolescents. And as you move up in age range, the number increases, but still thinking about how it's impacting potentially our students. And then we get into the ages of people who are teachers, parents, etc. So looking at this diagram, the annual number of people who die by suicide exceeds the number of people who attempt suicide but do not die. For every suicide death, there are approximately 9 hospitalizations, 15 emergency department visits, and 29 attempts that do not result in hospitalizations or emergency department visits. So then at the top, the tip of the iceberg, which is the number of suicide deaths, is a much larger indicator of the suicidal activity in the United States. And so looking at 2020, which is based on the 2018 report, we can see that Texas itself experienced over 3,000 suicide deaths, and nearly 3 times more Texans died by suicide than homicide. So that means that about 1 Texan every 2 hours has died by suicide. And almost 3 times as many Texans died by suicide than in alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents. So again, in Texas, suicide is the second leading cause of death for older teens, college age, and young adults. So that is ages 10 to 34. So in the United States and in the state of Texas, suicide is the second leading cause of death. And looking at our older populations, suicide is the 4th leading cause of death for folks ages 35 through 44. So again, I know I mentioned we're going to look at some data, but this is where we really see what the impacts are on us as a nation and as a state. So the prevalence of suicide across Texas, looking between the sexes, male and female. The male is here in the gray, female here in the red. There's a clear difference, right? They're not even close. So data indicates that higher rates of recent years for both male and females who have died by suicide. And we can just look at the trend of how that is shifting. If we start here with 2002 and then moving up to 2018, we see that we're kind of trending upward, and especially looking at our younger males. So looking at our high school populations across different sectors of identity, this data is generated from 2019 by the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, which showed that female teens are nearly twice as likely to seriously consider suicide. So the rate associated with sexual identity pertaining to our LGBTQ students, notice that that rate is substantially higher. And so that goes to the thoughts that high school students are the thoughts and attempts of high school students to die by suicide are generally higher than they are among adults, even though the adolescent numbers seem to be low. For Texas high school students, reported considering suicide in the previous 12 months, the data indicates that nearly 1 in 5 had seriously thought about suicide in the past 12 months. Female students seriously consider at a higher rate than male students. White students also self-report a higher rate of seriously considering suicide than Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino students. When sexual identity is considered, the rate is significantly higher. So 1 in 2 bisexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans students, those rates are higher than the national average. So all of this to say that we really have to be cognizant of how people identify. We have several different identity markers, and we just want to make sure that we are not ignoring populations or kind of making sure that we are aware of how identity can impact us. And I believe we're going to talk about that a little later in the presentation. The Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System tracks the data over time. So looking between 2001 and 2019, we see there's been an increase in high school student suicide attempts on both the national and the state levels. So national would be here in the red, Texas in the blue. The decline posted for Texas in 2019 is not classified statistically relevant at this time, since it is based on only 1 year of data. By 2021, we will be able to ascertain a clearer picture. Thoughts and attempts among high school students are higher than adults in general, although deaths among adolescents are lower. And so looking at high school students who attempted suicide in the past 12 months, looking at self-identified, because that is important, sexual orientation, looking at our numbers from 2017 to 2019, we see that LGBTQ students are at higher risk for a suicide attempt compared to students who self-identify as straight. Thoughts and attempts among high school students, again, like we said, are higher in adults, but deaths among adolescents, again, are lower. So research is showing us who may have elevated risk for suicide. And so I'm going to give us an opportunity to read through this list really quickly. So I have a question. It's not on the poll. I would like to know, so the title says research shows there are several groups who may have elevated risk for suicide. Does this mean that this will predict suicide? Will this predict suicide? Go ahead and answer in the chat. And then ladies, if anybody responds, can you let me know?
Alana is, girl, MVP of today. She said no immediately.
Yes, absolutely. And in case you're like, how did she know that? One, it's right here. But we know that certain factors contribute to risk for suicide, but does not predict, like Ms. Alana said. So there are also other combinations of risk factors to consider that we see up here. That also includes persons with history of suicide attempts or PTSD, LGBTQ populations, our American Indian and American Alaskan Native populations, older males, especially non-Hispanic whites, and then also exposure to ACEs. Does anybody know what ACEs stand for? You can unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat. What does ACEs stand for?
Yay, Jamie! Adverse childhood experiences.
Yes, and in case, Jamie, I know you know this, and you all know this, and guess what? It's right here. Y'all can tell the former teacher in me. I love to like challenge. So looking at current data, emerging research has shown us that certain professions also increase risk for suicide. These professions include those who have exposure to trauma, those who have already had access to lethal means. So this includes our first responders, healthcare providers, veterinarians, construction, and agricultural professions. It's also an important problem among older adults. Suicide rates for older adults are higher than the national average. We also know that suicide attempts by older adults are more likely to result in death among younger people. 1 out of every 100 to 200 young people who attempt suicide dies, compared to 1 out of every 4 adults. So I'll say that again, 1 out of every 1 to 200 young people who attempt suicide die, whereas 1 out of every 4 older adults who attempt suicide will die by suicide. And other reasons are, if we can think of any, that older adults plan more carefully and have more access to deadly methods. They're more likely to be alone, live alone, less likely to be discovered. And they're also physically frail and have less likely attempts to recover. Older adults are more likely to disclose suicidal intent. Health problems largely explain the higher odds of disclosure. Therefore, healthcare providers provide a significant opportunity to intercept older adults at suicide risk. And there are also social support systems that provide an opportunity to elevate the awareness of warning signs, especially for our elderly populations. Lastly, 50% of adults that are 65 and 60% of all suicide deaths for those 85 and up, there is an indication that physical health problems where suicide is a precipitant. So again, fear of becoming a burden to others or their loved ones, not feeling as independent as they have been. Thinking about almost 25% of our older adults who have died by suicide have told a family member. So we want to make sure we're aware of all these warning signs across age groups. Insomnia. Has anyone ever had a hard time falling asleep? I know that most of my 2020 was about redoing what I was, my routines were slashed. So there were a lot of times that I was just not able to sleep or sleep throughout the night. So it increases risk for suicide attempts, especially in middle-aged and older adults who have had bout with depression and or suicidal thoughts. And this particular study that was done recommended that clinicians work with middle-aged and older adults because there is a potential for that impact of the suicide risk by assessing and treating those sleep disturbances. So they say that, good sleep is what we need to be healthy. And so that also contributes to our overall mental and emotional well-being, making sure that we get enough rest. So what are some other epidemiology highlights? So looking at gender, so we've talked about age, we've talked about gender, we've talked about sexual identity. So more males die by suicide when more females attempt. Does anybody know why? So we're asking this question: why are more males dying by suicide, but more female attempts are made?
The males usually are alone when they do it, and the females usually have somebody who's going to check on them.
Oh, I didn't even think, who answered that? Thank you. Thank you for answering that, Virgie. Yes, that is also true, but not the answer that's given here. Does anybody have another one? That's a good point. Males are probably more lone wolves. Any other thoughts?
We're seeing in the chat, men don't think, they just do, no emotions. And I believe Maureen has the correct answer that we were looking for of males use more lethal methods.
That's it. So men use more lethal means, whereas women use less lethal means. So one of the most lethal means is firearms, like we talked about earlier in the presentation. Less lethal means could be cutting and also poison. So good job for answering that correctly. For youth, Latina teens have higher than average suicide attempt rates. For youth, one of the highest self-reported attempts in the US were Latina female teens, and the highest death rate for both teens and adults is white males. Some social and demographic characteristics are more strongly associated with attempted and suicide deaths than others. So we've talked about occupations, invisible illnesses, casual connections to mental and physical health, chronic pain, exposure to trauma, ACEs, and other factors. From a public health perspective, we know that this is multi-sectoral, multifactorial, right? So when we're thinking about suicide prevention, so in addition to prevention, intervention, and post-intervention strategies, we also need to recognize and lower risk factors, support protective factors, recognize those warning signs, and then know how to connect someone to care. So we are about to make sure that we go through all of these, and we're going to talk about risk factors, protective factors, and warning signs. But before we do that, we're going to take a small break. We're going to give you about 5 minutes. I will keep track of the time, if that's okay, ladies. Good to go for a break?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
I will, how about a little tune?
Amor salvaje, como una selva tropical, nos incendiamos y en un instante sin saber que no dejamos ni una ramita de ilusión para después. Me dicen túmbalo, no déjalo, no dejes que se separe. Juega tú con él como si fuera tu Natale. De un solo golpe ya, túmbale los dientes. Que se pueda aprender Clever Music ya se siente. Túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, 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 no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, 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 no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, 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 no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, no déjalo, túmbalo, túmbalo. Bueno, esta es para las mujeres. Pécate, 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 samba. Pécate, 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 que no hace palma, la mira con cariño. Vamos a darle, toma, 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 toma. Estás escuchando DJ Liendro.
All right, that's our time. Hopefully you were able to do something for yourself in those 5 minutes. And we're going to go ahead and resume.
All right, fantastic. So we have a poll, Cecilia, if you don't mind
Yes.
bringing that up for us. So everyone, going to do a really quick poll before we launch
Is this
into
the
talking about
some
risk factors.
occupations?
No, this would be for 30.
How familiar are you with the risk factors?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, should have launched.
Perfect. Everyone take a few seconds to place your vote.
By the way, it's totally anonymous, so I have no idea who says what.
And
We will not be emailing.
there's no wrong answer.
There you go. See how, look at that. Look at that.
Look at that participation. Let's see if we can get more. One more. 45 seconds. Might have lost a friend to the bathroom.
Someone is like trying to scramble, but we'll move forward. So as we mentioned, there is no wrong answer for that one in particular. It's all about a different familiarity with it. But as Nicole mentioned, we certainly, after we've learned all of those, we talked about trends, we talked about some stats, the epidemiology, again, of suicide. We want to get into the risk factors, protective factors, and warning signs. These come in handy when you're having conversations with someone who may be at risk, as well as when you're kind of maybe observing them. Maybe you and your colleagues have noticed some things going on with maybe an adult or a student in your life, okay? So the key points you want to keep in mind when we're thinking about these concepts is much of our day is based on learning, right, about these, okay? And there's a reason why we emphasize this, is because suicide at the end of the day is multifactorial. There is no one cause of suicide. So we can advance. Because suicide is multifactorial, as noted by the World Health Organization, suicide is complex. It involves several interacting factors that are often not visible to the people around someone at risk. Therefore, knowing risk factors, protective factors, and warning signs, it is a critical step in order to help and connect someone who's at risk to the care that they need. So again, in this gatekeeper training, you will be able to help people think about the complexity and understand the complexity of suicide. So let's define these terms. So risk factors are characteristics that make it more likely that individuals will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. Protective factors are characteristics that make it less likely that individuals will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. Want to advance a slide? There's a difference between risk factors and warning signs. Risk factors indicate someone is at a heightened risk for suicide, but indicates little or nothing about immediate risk. For example, nationally, middle-aged white non-Hispanic males have the highest rate of suicide death. Based on this information, middle-aged white non-Hispanic males are at heightened risk for suicide. However, this tells us little or nothing about immediate risk for a specific individual. So I hope that makes sense, right? Think about that again. Nationally, middle-aged white non-Hispanic males have the highest rate of suicide death, but based on that, middle-aged non-white Hispanics are at heightened risk, okay? So this doesn't tell you anything about a specific individual. That's looking at it from more of a population level, okay? When you're thinking about warning signs indicate an immediate risk of suicide. From the organization SAVE, warning signs of suicide are indicators that a person may be in acute danger and may urgently need help. For example, talking about wanting to die or killing oneself is a warning sign. Consider this example for distinguishing between risk factors and warning signs. Now back to our example using our middle-aged white non-Hispanic male. He has a risk factor because of his sex, age, and ethnicity. He is exhibiting warning signs if he is talking about wanting to die. Being able to recognize risk factors and warning signs is essential in gatekeeper training. To help understand the distinction between risk factors, protective factors, and warning signs, let's look at this chart from SPRC. From a public health perspective, we are generally more familiar with the public education on heart disease risk factors, protective factors, and warning signs. Let's review these examples in distinguishing among these important concepts. Remember, you don't need multiple warning signs. One is enough to seek care. Another thing I just want to make note of when we're looking at this slide is that risk factors and protective factors are found on various levels. So you can look at someone and you want to think about them as an individual, their family, and their community, okay? There are also variable characteristics that can also be present. So fixed things that can't be changed, or family history of suicide or trauma exposure, okay? And then there's other things considered modifiable, things that can be changed, meaning treating a mood disorder and reducing stressors such as unemployment or homelessness, okay? So again, we just want to emphasize that risk factors and protective factors can be seen on various levels. That's at individual, family, and community, right? And then there are variable characteristics. Some of them are fixed. That's something like your family history of experiencing people who have died by suicide within multiple generations, as well as exposure to trauma. Think about police brutality, things like that. And then when you're thinking about modifiable, these are things that can be changed, right? So you think about treating a mood disorder. Sometimes people are on meds, sometimes they're not on meds. That can be one or the other. It could be a protective factor, it could be risk factor, and then reducing stressors like unemployment and homelessness. Those are things that can change, okay? Just so keep that in mind. As we move forward. In suicide prevention, oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. There's a poll question here.
Oh,
not a poll, but a chat question. So the chat question, ding, 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 brr, 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 brr. Alert, 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 go to your chat. What about this image of a rock climber reflects risk? And I'll repeat the question and you guys can unmute yourself or share in the chat. What about this image of a rock climber reflects risk?
His shoes.
Okay, what about his shoes?
They not secure enough to make him balance on the rocks.
Okay. Anyone else? Cecilia, I think you can see the chat. I can't.
His hand.
His hand, hand placement.
Reach for the far rock, and so it's like he's not staying close. You know what I mean? I know what you're saying, Phyllis. I just can't vote.
His hand placement, right? It's not helping him reach for the next ledge to pull himself up. I get it. Anyone else?
Does he even have like a cable on? I don't even.
Yes, he does. Actually, if you can see on his right-hand side.
Okay, well, I thought it would be supposed to be above him.
Yeah, I don't see
it to be on his back.
Yeah, I was about to say, someone else put in the chat, he may be free climbing.
Yeah, that's a different.
Now, what about that? Is that, to me, that's risky in and of itself. All right. So I'm glad we got so much interaction there. So Sharifa, talk to us about risk factors and tell us more about this mountain climber.
So as we say, right, thank you for that. As we say, risk factors are characteristics that make it more likely that the person will consider or attempt or die by suicide, right? So when you're looking at this image, we are using the rock climbing picture because it illustrates risk factors that a climber may face, as well as protective factors through training, ropes, tools, and support from other climbers. Researchers have identified hundreds of risk factors, but according to SPRC, some of the most common major risks are prior suicide attempts, mood disorders, substance use disorders, and access to lethal means. And we will discuss each of these. In several, we can advance the slide. In several studies, one of the strongest predictors is a previous suicide attempt, as I mentioned before. However, it is important to note that 9 out of 10 persons who have previously attempted suicide do not go on to die by suicide. If you are aware that someone has made a previous attempt, it is very important to carefully consider this risk factor. So it can kind of feel like, wait. We just said that it is a predictor, but it depends on the person. So that's when you want to make sure you're paying more attention and seeing if it continues to be a risk factor based on that specific person, okay? Research appears to indicate a strong connection between mood disorders and a risk factor for suicide. The national strategy describes research that indicates more than 60 to 70% of suicidal deaths occur among individuals with mood disorders. Again, suicide is multifactorial, and while mood disorders appear to elevate risk, it is not solely the cause of suicide. Substance use disorders encompass a wide range of substance types, and there are a wide variety of types. For example, alcohol intoxication is present in over a third of suicide attempts. Alcohol misuse indicates a higher risk, as high as 10 times the general population. Persons who inject drugs are about 14 times at greater risk of suicide. This is written funny. Sorry, I'm reading some facts and it's written funny. So if a person is under the influence of any substance, it's important for you to understand that the risk level is automatically elevated. Can I advance? Easy access to lethal means heightens risk of dying by suicide. This chart illustrates the acute period of heightened risk for suicide is often only minutes or hours long. Let me say that one more time. This chart, what it's showing you is that the acute period, right, that short period of heightened risk for suicide is often only minutes or hours long. Access to lethal means during this acute period can increase the likelihood of a fatal suicide attempt. Often, one thing I want to also note, sorry, Nicole, often it can prevent their initial plan when intervening, gaining access to what they're preventing them from being able to access lethal means really is very important in interrupting that acute period. There are hundreds of risk factors for suicide. This is not a comprehensive list, naturally. And remember, risk factors do not automatically predict suicide. However, knowledge of risk factors helps us understand which individuals may become psychologically distressed and consider suicide. For instance, trauma and PTSD, as well as abuse or bullying history. The Veterans Administration research identified chronic pain as a risk factor for suicide. A family history of suicide, as we talked about before, doesn't automatically predict, but it may indicate a lack of family support, the family's inability to recognize or address mental or substance use disorder. People who have experienced loss by suicide may be at elevated risk. I implore you to look at suicide contagion, look that concept up as well. Loss is frequently cited as a factor. So that could be job, death of a family member or a friend, a relationship, pets, and other loss experiences elevate risk. A person's support system can be disrupted during life transitions. The disruptions of support comes at a time when there is a high need for connectedness during the adjustment period. Everyone think about right now. Legal, law enforcement, and judicial involvement also is connected to elevated risk. Law enforcement is often the first point of contact for someone at risk for suicide. The Center for Disease Control specifies that a cluster has occurred when attempts and or deaths are at a higher number than they would normally be expected for a specific population or other connection. That could be geography, school, age, kids, so on and so forth. So let me say that one more time, because that goes back to talking about suicide contagion. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, specifies that a cluster has occurred when you're seeing multiple deaths, I should say, not attempts and deaths, at a higher number than they would normally be when you're looking at a specific population or another connection. So that could be geography, meaning the placement, that could be a campus, that could be a zip code, an age range, so on and so forth. Now let's discuss protective factors. Protective factors are positive conditions, persona, and social resources that promote resiliency and reduce the potential for suicide, as well as other high-risk behavior. So I have a question for you right now. What are some examples of protective factors? And you can unmute yourself, you can put it in the chat, but what are some examples of protective factors? Remember, they are positive conditions, persona, and social resources that promote resiliency and reduce the potential for suicide. Oh, that's a good one. Yes, Maureen. Family support, supportive family. Vision. Was vision for this one, or was that when we were talking about rock climbing? It's for rock climbing. Well, vision in your life, that could be a protective factor, right? Gives you purpose. Any other protective factors? We have a lot of family support. Anything else that can help an adult or a young person feel friends? Absolutely. Community, positive peer relationships, yes. And remember, we're thinking individual, you can think community, right? So what can that person possess that could act as a protective factor for themselves? Belonging to a group, yes. And we have to be, this is one of those times when I'm going to be tricky, right, Alana? Let's think about that. So when you think of young people that might have gang involvement, some people, you know, there was a time when we felt like, we know that there's negative, there can be, that's a risk factor in of itself, but a lot of times the reason why a young person may get involved with a gang is for that sense of belonging, correct? If they don't get it from their family or any other kind of community related institution. So these are the things, right, that should be playing in your mind as well. You can also, maybe it's your faith, maybe it's your belief in your purpose in life, going back to that vision that I stole from Phyllis for this one. But it's just really important to know that when you're thinking about, yes, a church group, any spiritual group, any faith-based, any common belief in something or passion, again, that builds community. Also, it's just really, really important to know that when you're thinking of someone and their protective factors, do not only think about external factors, okay? You wanna also think about maybe natural characteristics they have that you may be able to bring up when you're thinking about discussing if they're at risk, okay? So not everyone who has a mood disorder thinks about or acts out suicidal behavior, and conceptually, most people have positive conditions and personal and social resources that promote resiliency. So we're going to continue with thinking about protective factors. So some of the major protective factors that are usually made a note of is the connectedness to individuals, family, community, and social institutions, as we talked about, problem-solving skills, contacts with caregivers. Remember, young people only need one trusted adult in their life, minimum, right? And then effective mental health care. Lethal means safety is also a significant protective factor, but we will be covering this in much more detail as we continue. Now, when we're thinking about connecting to friends and family and community and social institutions and other environments, we have to know that that's very, very important in developing that connectedness for whomever. Several programs have been shown to decrease suicidal thoughts or behaviors because they include elements of connectedness. As mentioned in the national strategy, being connected was the main component of a post-crisis suicide prevention program for adults who were present in a hospital, in a hospital emergency department for non-suicidal behaviors. Let me say that one more time. So based on the national strategy, one of the major components for post-crisis suicide prevention program for adults that presented themselves in hospital emergency departments for non-fatal suicide behaviors was that connectedness, okay? So what connectedness strategies are available in our setting? So when you think about where you work, what are some ways that adults or students can remain connected to each other? And this is very tricky considering our time right now. So what can we do? What are we doing in our virtual spaces? I know some people are in person, but what are we doing to aid that connectedness? And you can go ahead and place that in the chat.
Sharifa, I'd love to share.
Sure.
I think this comes with that getting to know you. So just having opportunities for people to share their true and authentic selves. So asking questions, asking about people's interests, and making sure to make a note of that and bringing it up. And like, I know you like, what is it? What's the game? Oh, rocks. It's escaping me. My nephews play it all the time. It's ridiculous. They play it on
Minecraft?
There you go. There you go. Say it again. What is it called, Cecilia?
Minecraft?
Minecraft. Roadblocks as well. See? Minecraft and Roblox. So they play that all the time. And when I see them, I bring it up. What level are you on? And they just feel, kind of important because I remember what is important to them. So sorry, I blanked on the names.
No, that's good though, right? Is that remembering key factors. I mean, it's funny how you say your nephews, and I'm thinking about grown adults giggle when you pay attention to the important things in their life, right? I would say adults are big kids. All they want to know, Oprah says a lot of times, all we want to know is that we want to be validated, right? And the manner in which you validate people is by showing that they are important enough to remember their names. Well, some of us, it's hard to do names, but names and little factors about their life, their pet's name, their favorite food, so on and so forth. So that's an awesome example, Nicole. Thank you so much. Was there anything in the chat? I can kind of see it too. Sorry, Cecilia. Hannah, that was a great question. Among like where we work, so in your respective work environments, how can you stay connected? How do you get young people to stay connected with you? Or how have you seen people remain connected in a time when disconnection is kind of the move?
I think she was also guessing the game name.
Say it again.
Popular one with youth. It's called Among Us. There's like they're little robot people. I don't understand it. I'm old. I think she was guessing that was the game Nicole was referring to.
Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna stay out of the chat because I'm not getting them in real time, and I'm just, we're gonna talk about this later. Talk about connectedness. My coworkers are gonna keep me connected to this moment of silliness later on. But so thank you to everyone. But it's just important. I think this is a very important time. There's a reason why we're even having this training right now, right? We are seeing and or anticipating that we will see an increase in suicides, suicide attempts, ideation among various populations, right? It doesn't matter your background, your age. And so really thinking about in the environments you are working in, how are you remaining connected safely? How are we driving connectedness among our community, our various communities, okay? So that's just something to contemplate. Thank you, everybody. Ooh, that's a good one. Bible study. I've heard about this thing my friend made me get on Clubhouse, where people just get to talk about whatever you are interested in. There's like all these things, but that's a way to stay connected when you feel so distant from everybody, okay? So we're going to move forward. Persons with physical and psychiatric conditions that may increase risk for suicide can often be effectively treated or managed in such a way as to reduce potential risk for suicidal ideation. So we don't want people thinking if someone has a physical or psychiatric condition that that's a risk factor and that's it. That's not true. That's not fixed necessarily, right? It may increase the risk, but if it's effectively treated or managed in such a way, it will reduce the potential risk of suicide behavior. Again, the national strategy dedicates substantial attention to improving treatment and support services for persons at risk for suicide, and the Zero Suicide Initiative is the epicenter for this important work, okay? It is important to treat any underlying condition as well as deploy strategies that directly address suicide risk. A person without skills in solving problems or in resolving conflict may find it very difficult to manage situations in which they find themselves. By helping them to develop these types of skills, they may be better able to successfully navigate difficult situations or conflict in relationships without developing a sense of frustration or hopelessness. Being a member of a community or a family that discourages suicide and promotes social integration can be very protective. Improved problem-solving skills increases resiliency and coping strategies for persons who may be at risk for suicide. Further, because suicidal behavior is often aligned with other concerns such as mood disorders like depression and substance use, improving resiliency and coping strategies can have a positive impact on various suicide risk factors. Caring Contacts provides for an ongoing opportunity to offer support to someone who may be at risk for suicide. Regular interval outreach and contact is demonstrated to improve suicide prevention outcomes. While primarily targeting clinical environments such as emergency departments, clinical staff personnel, these strategies can be widely deployed to support individuals at risk of suicide through in-person visits and contacts via peers, family, or friends, and through regular points of outreach via phone, text, postcards, and other methods. And as we imagine, we have to expand on that as we're thinking about being safe during COVID-19. So I'm going to pass it on to my partner, Nicole, to talk about.
And here I was again on mute. Oh, silly. So we've talked about risk factors, protective factors, and now we're moving on to warning signs, which are super important in the gatekeeper role, because these are things that we can observe, that we can see, such as speech, the behavior, and moods. So the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention lists those 3 categories for warning signs. Any of the warning signs should prompt you to immediately call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you don't have the number, get ready to write it down. 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255, or a mental health professional. So if a person is talking about wanting to hurt or kill themselves, they are squarely in the suicidal zone. If they're asking for means or methods of suicide, they're also in this zone. Writing or talking about death, dying, or suicide is another indicator that this person is at high risk of suicidal behavior. So some other indicators you could look for are talking, writing, drawing about death, dying, or suicide, posting suicide-related content on social media, and giving away possessions, pets, and things of value.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I think sometimes, especially with youth, there can be like a culture of like making jokes about suicide that doesn't have like this, like the intent of like being acted upon.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you have advice on how to navigate those instances, because I have had people who said things like, oh, I'm going to kill myself, or, oh, I just got to, like, I have all this work to do, I'm going to kill myself. And I don't really, it's difficult for me to like gauge seriousness and also like engage in those conversations with them.
Thank you for sharing. Who was that? I can't see your face, so.
Oh, it was Hannah.
Hi. I have had to be in this situation a couple of times, and really it is to reiterate to students or whomever it is that when we are in this setting, and I hear you say that, it is my duty because I am responsible for you, because I care about you, that I have to, follow these protocols and follow up with it. So I get it that it's jokes for friends, but in like this setting and where I can hear, I'm going to have to kind of like follow through with this. And so just giving rationale of what has to happen each time can be helpful, so that one, we know it's serious. And some of the rebuttal that you get is, oh, I'm just playing, you adults are so serious, wow. But it is because you have to take it seriously each time. So for the student who is not playing, I have to be able to like do this reaction each and every time. So that would be my advice. Anyone else care to give some advice on how to handle that situation? Thank you for asking. And also, did that kind of answer your question? Hopefully I'm not leaving you in the lurch there.
Give a resounding yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's look at some direct and some indirect examples of some warning signs. So we want to keep in mind that a person who is suicidal may not communicate directly how they're thinking or feeling. So as you're speaking to them, they probably haven't processed or clearly thought out what their plans are, or if they are planning an attempt. So their risk may be leading them into that direction. So if someone is direct and forthright about having suicidal thoughts, action is called for and probing becomes less relevant. However, vague statements that could allude to suicidal intent are most likely an invitation on the part of that person to ask you more, like kind of dig deeper. So making sure that we are aware of what that person is saying and we're able to follow up with what they've asked of us or what they're saying. Oh, tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean by you can't take it anymore? What can't you take anymore? I've definitely heard this one. As I mentioned, I'm a former middle school teacher. So I've heard a lot of these indirect and some of the direct examples. And so just kind of getting to that, asking those probing questions, or even when you hear, I want to kill myself, do you have a plan? Those are the ones where we're trying to like, we have to take immediate action. So warning signs can also be communicated by behavior. There are a number of indirect statements or behaviors that might indicate that a person is considering suicide. A few possible statements are listed above. It's not an exhaustive list, but just some examples. It's important for us to scan for signs or cues that might indicate potential suicidal thinking. So I'll just, has anyone, you can just show by like a reaction or hands or thumbs, has anyone ever heard of any of these warning signs behavior? Yes, Virgie. Oh, that raising the hand is like, yep, I've heard these.
It's just saying I heard it.
I gotcha.
But I have a question.
Yes.
This may not be the right time for my question though.
You go ahead. We're gonna find some ways to cut down some time, but we love the engagement. So please ask.
What happens when a person attempts suicide over and over, but when they attempt it, they're always in a position where somebody will find them or rescue them?
What happens if a person is continuing to attempt to die by suicide, but there's always someone there. I don't know the exact answer to that question. What that sounds like to me is definitely a cry for help, and that there's something else at play beyond that. So there's some pain that's bothering this person. So I don't feel equipped to give the exact answer. If there's anyone else that's on the call that would care to offer some advice, this is a very good question. I'm pretty sure we've seen this a couple of times, especially in our training. We've seen people that talk about they don't want to take some students seriously because they're always threatening and having to go through their protocol. And they're like, the student isn't serious, but we know that there's something obviously there. Any offerings in the chat? Thank you for asking that question, by the way.
Yeah, Ms. Virgie, like Nicole, I don't have an exact answer. Again, everyone's situation is so different. And there's so many other questions that come to mind as you propose that potential scenario. But like Nicole said, there's definitely is a cry for help, as Jamie is saying in the chat. There's definitely some unmet needs there. And as Nicole alluded, and even Hannah was talking about, sometimes this culture of doing things that there's a blurry line between determining if it's a cry for help or if it's something where they truly they want to take their own lives. And as we say in the very beginning, at the end of the day, we have to take them serious every single time, and trying to identify what's going on. Is there a mood disorder? What are some of the risk factors that are there? What are the unmet needs that may be unknown to the caregivers that are around? But yeah, it's a really tricky scenario, and all we know is that it's recommended that it's taken serious every time.
Okay.
So when we're looking at risk factors and warning signs, we understand that we want to make sure we're using our instinct, right? If something, I always call it my spidey senses. If they start ticking and tingling, pay attention to them. You have your instincts for a reason. If the thought of suicide crosses your mind, assume it has crossed the mind of others or the person that you're talking to. It should be emphasized that there's no one risk factor that will allow you to know that someone might be suicidal. So rather, a person in psychological distress will likely have a combination of risk factors and warning signs. So you have to look out for multiple signals and not just one. And we have this quote from a Scholastic article: high suicide risk, whether for individuals or communities, is usually found in a combination of risk or constellation of multiple risk factors. And that goes back to the point that Sharifa made earlier, that suicide is multifactorial. So remember, the higher the underlying risk factors plus lowering protective factors and warning signs gives us a higher overall risk for suicide. And again, the importance to trust your instincts.
Thank you, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've gone through the epidemiology, we've talked about protective factors, risk factors, and warning signs. We're going to get into the ASK model specifically, okay? Some variations of these steps are usually a part of any suicide prevention gatekeeper training. These steps allow anyone to assist someone who may be at risk for suicide. You are not providing or expected to provide clinical diagnosis or mental health care. It does help support someone who may be struggling and offer opportunities to connect with appropriate care. Think back to that heart attack example and the CPR. You are like CPR, doing what you can to connect someone to appropriate care. Asking about suicide does not put the thought of suicide in someone's head. It does often give the person a sense of relief that someone is listening and offering hope. I know that may have stunned someone on the call. I can't see everyone's face, but it is very important to understand that asking about suicide does not put the thought of suicide in someone's head. It simply gives the person a sense of, oftentimes it gives the person a sense of relief that someone is listening and offering hope. Ask is a process to offer hope to prevent the tragic loss of life, not to provide counseling or clinical treatment. If something doesn't seem right based on what you are observing or hearing, starting with a simple inquiry into their well-being may be enough to get the dialogue going. Oftentimes, the initial impulse to an inquiry is a fast yes, like we all do every day when someone asks us how we're doing. So a lot of times, we kind of are a bad habit of just, how are you? I'm good, right? Are you thinking about suicide? No, so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that you're taking the time, right? Therefore, a follow-up inquiry will show the person that you're totally interested and not just exchanging greetings or mindless inquiry. So you want to spend time asking them truly, how are they doing and what's going on? Ask again, as we recommend. It will convey that you are concerned and willing to talk. Find out if a person is open to a private conversation. Give the person some time to adjust their thinking and their mindset. Remember, they're always protecting themselves. Perhaps a small walk to a private area is often enough. It is important that the person you are concerned about feel they can speak with you in privacy without anyone overhearing what they're saying. Find some place you can speak to them that is private. To begin a conversation, communicate that you care about them and that you are interested in them and their life. Acknowledge that everyone sometimes faces challenges or difficulties, to allow them to see you as a person with feelings and problems as well. You can begin to express observations in multiple ways. For example, I sense that you are feeling really down today. Is that true? Or you seem really stressed. Are you okay? Maybe even, you don't even seem like yourself lately. Can we talk about it? And last but not least, it seems like you are dealing with a lot right now. How have you been coping? If you suspect someone may be at risk, it is important that you ask them about suicidal thoughts, behaviors, and plans. In asking them, depending on the context and your relationship, ask directly about the suicidal thoughts or plans. If you ask the question and the person says no, but you are still concerned that they are at risk, ask again later in the conversation. That might seem uncomfortable, but again, sometimes the instinct of someone, they've been defensive or protecting themselves, is to simply say no. So you may want to continue the conversation about what's going on and then ask them again. We encourage that. So when we're thinking about discussing direct ways of asking about suicide, the stress about how you ask the question is not as important as actually asking it. So what are some other ways to directly ask about suicide? So we gave you some examples in the slide before, and you're seeing some on this particular slide, but what are some other comfortable ways that you may be able to ask someone if they are considering suicide? You can put your answer in the chat. Have you thought about harming yourself? So Brian, that is a really good one. So based on some of the best practices that we've been learning, is that oftentimes when we say harm, it leaves a little bit too much room for interpretation. Let me put my face on there so you guys are not like, excuse the hair, I've been moving it, right? But sometimes when you ask, are you harming yourself? Oftentimes, because there is non-suicidal self-injury and SSI, which can be cutting or other behaviors that cause injury to the body, but don't necessarily lead to death, harming can kind of sit in that in-between place. So we encourage people that although we want to use different terminology other than kill yourself, because killing or dying seems like such a harsh word, the truth is that when you use such direct terms, the person is not capable of interpretation, right? There's no blurriness, because harming yourself and dying by suicide are very distinct and clear in a different way. Brian, I hope does that make sense? I want to validate your proposal of that question, because absolutely that, depending on the situation, can absolutely be perfect. Sometimes we are interacting with students, we may notice signs that they may be injuring themselves, but we also know that injuring themselves doesn't necessarily mean that. So that's a great proposed question. And I challenge you to consider, everyone on the call, that even though that's our instinct, to maybe use that term in a different time. But when we're thinking about someone's really thinking about it, you want to say that. So that's another option, right? Have you ever thought of hurting yourself? And again, I hope y'all don't get mad at me. Don't kill the messenger, okay? That the hurting is also another term that kind of falls in that harming category because of the blurriness of that, right? Again, being very specific about losing your life. So using terminology that leans more towards killing or dying by suicide can be more helpful and can give you more clarity and give that person clarity about what you're specifically asking. Nicole, I saw you unmute yourself.
Yes, I know that this is a difficult question to ask. That's why we have people practice it, because it is something you have to get used to. It is even when you ask in a professional setting or practicing, it can be uncomfortable. But we want to stress that, especially if we're dealing with youth, their frontal lobes are not completely formed. So therefore, their thinking, their long-term planning is not really there. Sometimes they don't recognize what is the word I'm looking for? How finite it is to say, I want to die. I don't want to get up anymore. And so understanding what that truly means, sometimes it is necessary to use that language, even though it seems harsh, because if they are considering it, you need to know that they're yes or no. And sometimes the answer is no, right? Like, no, I don't want that. I'm just in so much pain. I don't know how to deal with it. So that is also the importance of asking it outright, because you want to make sure you know how to navigate the next parts of the conversation.
Yes. So I hope everyone understands what we're sharing with you. We're not trying to make your jobs more difficult. We're simply conveying what we have learned over time through the countless trainings we've gone through when it comes to this conversation. Being very direct and specific is the most effective way to truly gauge what's going on with the adult or the young person that you're working with, okay? So really spending some time gaining comfort with the language can be very crucial to successfully assisting anyone who may be at risk. We can move forward. Being aware, so when we're talking about learning how to ask, right? Being aware of your tone of voice, your body language, and how you ask the question is really important. Stay caring and non-judgmental. Oftentimes, you may be in situations where you're hearing things that may go against your values or your beliefs, but it's important in that particular setting to stay caring and non-judgmental, work on that poker face and the tone. Your words do not have to be perfect, right? We are human. And again, some of us, I always say, these are the best practices, right? Absolutely. What we're giving you is the information that we have based on research by national and global organizations. We also want you to be very culturally competent. So you know who you're working with and how to speak with them. That's as important too. So it's not about the perfection of your words, but simply asking and being that as direct as possible. If you need help asking, there are resources, right? So there's a lifeline that can support you during the ask process. So there are hotlines that you can get in contact with if you think you're gonna have to have this type of conversation with someone who's at risk, okay? Other things to keep in mind, as we said, we mentioned about your voice and your body language, but also we encourage people to not say certain, there's some phrasing that people use that is not always helpful. So things like, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Or you wouldn't do anything stupid, would you? Sometimes we think that can stir them in the other direction, but the truth is all it may do is compound their guilt, and all they're trying to do is now get to this moment with you and it has not deviated them from their potential plan. So we don't want to, we want to watch our tone, as you could tell the way I said it, and even the things that I said, doing anything stupid, judging, right? Attributing negative terms or guilting them. Oh, I know your mom, your grandma. Those are the things that oftentimes they're not effective. They're shown to not be effective, okay? This leads a person to the conclusion that they need to tell you what you want to hear. And also, if they see suicide as their only solution, they will not perceive it as being stupid or hurtful. So they just see you as judgmental and they're going to move forward. If you are uncomfortable asking, and that's something that every single adult on this call has to ask themselves. If you just find yourself at a point where you are like, look, I just don't want to ask this question, then that means whenever you may be interacting with someone at risk, who's another trusted adult that is around that can step in and can have that conversation with them. That's not a indicator of your inability to do it. It's just that it's all about comfort level. If you're stressed, we even say don't have this conversation, right? You might be thinking of 1,000 things and can't be fully present. So really keep in mind what your state of mind is and if you're capable of, in that moment, of asking this question. One of the things we recommend is first, you want to acknowledge a response regardless if the person responds yes or no. Second, do your best to be natural on the subject of suicide. Do not imply the person is wrong or bad or stupid for thinking about suicide. If the answer is yes, acknowledge there's a lot of pain and suffering involved to get to the point of contemplating suicide. Their situation must be overwhelming. Acknowledge the conversation by stating, thank you for sharing. I am very concerned about you and your situation. I can see how you are in a tremendous amount of pain and how you could get to this point and how you may be thinking of suicide. So that is definitely you validating the moment that they're having. And so after you ask the question about suicide and you have a sense of the person's situation, it is then time for us to look at the first of the 3 S's, which is to seek more information. You want to use, when you're thinking about seeking more information, I hope you all are kind of seeing how the ASK model is breaking down. Okay, looking at that title, I'm just giving you the meat and potatoes, but you want to make sure that you're kind of seeing how it's flowing. So with this first S, when we're thinking about seeking more information, you want to use active listening techniques to learn more about the person's story. Active listening involves a wide range of skills: hearing, body language, verbal responses, and non-verbal gestures. And remember, this is somewhere where you want to be very aware of cultural differences. So what may be typical in your culture may not be, depending on who you're speaking with. So you have to make sure you're aware of that. Active listening uses open-ended questions to allow the person at risk to share their thoughts and feelings. People in psychological distress are often focused on or overwhelmed by multiple issues and may perceive suicide as a solution. Remember, suicide is multifactorial. They are not seeing or perceiving their situation clearly. So active listening is vital for you to understand what they are saying, okay? It's not a time to correct them. It's a time to simply acknowledge. And remember, during that conversation, you are looking for the factors and the signs that we discussed earlier. So pay attention when we're thinking about we consider this the 5 keys of active listening. So when you're giving the person, it's pretty much you giving the person undivided attention and acknowledging what's going on with them. So look at the speaker and avoid being distracted. That means cell phones, so on and so forth. The environment, showing that you're listening. So you're nodding occasionally, not in a patronizing way. Make sure your posture is open and interested. You want to provide feedback. So reflect on what has been said by paraphrasing or statements like, what I heard you say is, and then include, kind of repeat to them what they said to you. Ask questions to clarify certain points. Be curious is what we often say at the center, and summarize the speaker's comments periodically, so they know constantly that you are still engaged and you're paying close attention. So take it as a good old, you get a good old story. That's the best way to look at it, as opposed to being very nervous and not paying as close attention, okay? And deferring judgment. Don't interrupt with counter arguments and allow the speaker to finish their thoughts. And last but not least, Respond appropriately. Be candid about what you've observed. Thank the person for sharing the information and validate their situation. So next up, what we would normally do is an activity here. Again, considering limited time, what we want to do is we're just going to talk about it in the chat. So I'm just going to ask you some questions. The first thing is, when you think about active listening, now we talked about some of the key points, we talked about the 5 keys, but all of us have been through a really bad, we've all called that one friend or spoken to that one person and they were terrible listeners. I want you in the chat to share with us, what are a few things that people do that maybe we didn't mention that can cause someone to feel like they're not being listened to? What are some things that people do that help you know that they ain't listening to you? Overtalk you, scrolling through their phones, gotta love that one. What else? Looking around, yep. I personally love when people repeat the wrong thing. It's like, that's not what I said. That is definitely not what I said. Interrupting, saying, well, I, or this happened to me, basically. Yep. Changing conversation to be about them. Yes, we call them the Mr. Me Too's. Huff and puff when someone is talking, sighing, poor eye contact, diverting the conversation, looking upset, right? Irritated, you taking up their time, they don't want to be here. So we all are aware of, we're all aware of what it looks like when we're not being listened to, right? Sometimes we've been guilty of that. Sometimes we've been the victim of it. But at the end of the day, we all know. So thinking about the gravity of the situation, it's crucial for us to put any bad habits away and to put ourselves in their shoes and to really listen, right? While we do not want to bombard a person at risk with a comprehensive series of questions, not interrogation, we simply want to get them to talk and know they are connecting to someone who cares. At the same time, we are looking for information about their situation, actively listening for what are they distressed about? Have they talked to anyone else? And if they have been through this situation before, and what has worked in the past? Pay attention to your body language and your responses, and you definitely want to stay calm and be present. So going back to those 3 questions, if you notice when you ask about what's distressing them, if they've spoken to anyone else, and if they've been in that situation, what are we looking for? The risk factors, the protective factors, and the warning sign. I don't know why I left the S off. Now, some of the things, again, we want to emphasize that you're listening very intently for, while we do not want, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong one. So when we think about all the things that we've discussed, right? And we're thinking about listening for those warning signs, we're also looking for the risk factors. And particularly it's important when you're engaging with someone who may be at risk for suicide naturally. While we do not want to interrogate that person, that vulnerable person, listening carefully is important. Seeking to find out if that person is at immediate or serious risk is also very, very important. If you are on the line with someone at risk, asking someone else to get help. So sometimes if you know you're going to engage in this conversation with someone who may be at risk, you may want to have someone else more also aware so that they can be doing some work in the background in case they are at immediate risk, okay? Keep that person talking until you can connect them to care. If you're meeting with someone, the best choice is to physically connect them to care. So that means, and I know that's tricky in these times, but for some reason, if you are doing some work that's in person, really taking them to the counselor, right? Or taking them to the clinic, anything that makes it a warm handoff can be a lot more effective in taking care of someone who's at risk. And do not expect to handle this alone. So again, they say just like CPR, it takes more than one person. So it is important to connect to a qualified person who can take care of them after you've gone through the ASK model of really finding out what's going on with them.
All right, Sharifa, we're about to bring this baby on home. We are going to be we're going to go a little over time, so we understand. And I believe, Jamie, I think it's okay if we go a little bit over. So thank you for that little bit of grace. Okay, so we move forward. Let's talk about our safety, because that's what has to be top of mind. Your safety has to be first. So if a person who is in crisis becomes aggressive, we're gonna make sure you know as many tips as you can for de-escalating the situation. So making sure that even if you are not, you appear calm, making sure you talk slowly, with a calm tone, not restraining that person or restricting that person, and even taking a break from the conversation. So you can always ask for a partner or some extra help if you are needing a moment to step away from the conversation. So another point about safety concerns is the person that that is at risk. So making someone at risk to promise to be safe has been shown to be completely ineffective. We know that it was like, oh, they know me, they'll do it for me, but you don't want to make any type of agreements or contracts. There is researchers Stanley and Brown have developed a protocol for safety planning, which would be an excellent first step in learning how to create your own safety plan. And that resource can be found at safetyplan, all one word, .com, safetyplan.com. And in those safety plans, you want to make sure you're looking for coping strategies, support for the adults, peers or youth. Uh-oh, my computer said it was going to advance us. Crisis resources, and then also considering reasons to live. Formal safety planning is a clinical tool. Thinking about immediate steps for someone at risk can be helpful to convey hope to that person. So this diagram is showing us 3 levels of care around an individual at risk of suicide. So we're looking at the individual level, the family and friends, and then medical professionals. So what can a person do to reduce stress? What is something that someone could do to relieve stress?
Yes, we recommend the Calm meditation app, actually.
Yes.
So other meditation or yoga, I like to take PETA on a walk. So even if it's just around the corner, that helps me. Mindfulness, exercise.
Absolutely. So making sure that we get stressed often. So we want to make sure we know what those what those stressors could be, and how do we mitigate those? How do we interrupt those cycles of stress, and how do we kind of relieve ourselves from that stressfulness, and making sure we have connections to people. So if I feeling lonely and I know I just need someone to talk to, who is it that I can reach out to? Who is in my my ecosystem of support? Very similar to the diagram that we see here. So connecting to supports conveys the message that help is available. And so that's a lot of people are in these situations because they feel like there is no hope, there is no way out, but we want to make sure that we are connecting them to support and conveying the message that help is available and there is hope. So when we talked about who could be in our connection and who is in our ecosystem. So friends who can offer support, faith-based leaders, counselors, parents, healthcare provider. For some people, I definitely counted on a lot of my teachers to talk to, because even though they were saying the same thing as my parents, it just sounded different because it was coming from a different adult. Right? I don't know if anybody has experienced that. My mom would do that all the time. She would say, I just told you that. I'm like, yeah, but she said it differently. So we're not going to do this exercise as we are short of time. Cecilia and I are going to do a brief role play. Cecilia, are you there? I'm going to bring you up so I can see your face.
Yes, I am ready.
Okay, so I am going to play the role of someone at risk. Cecilia is going to play the caring contact. So we can do the student teacher role. I'm a student in Cecilia's arts and poetry class.
Right.
She's noticed something different about me. And so this is going to be a brief role play of our conversation. I'm ready when you are, Teach.
All right. Hey, Nicole, I wanted to keep you after class today just to kind of check in. I've noticed that you've been acting kind of distant. I haven't really been seeing you turn in your assignments on time. And I just kind of wanted to ask you if anything's going on.
You know, just whatever. It's too much to explain.
Okay. Is there anybody else that you might feel a little more comfortable talking to about this, or are you just not really feeling it today?
I don't, like, just all my friends have left. So I'm just kind of by myself, and it sucks because
Yeah.
nobody's really being my friend anymore.
That must be really hard for you. I can't even imagine. Have you had has any of your other behaviors really changed? Are you feeling things that you haven't felt before, maybe?
Kind of like, it's hard for me to fall asleep. It's hard for me to wake up. I don't want to do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I can understand that, especially when you feel really isolated and alone. It can be really easy to just kind of want to spend all day in bed. I get that. I've definitely had days like that. I'm curious, do you feel, have you had any thoughts about kind of wanting to stay in bed forever maybe, or, thinking about ways to harm yourself? And if so, maybe what might those ways look like?
I mean, yeah, I think being in bed all day would be great because, school sucks, life sucks. But harming myself, like, what do you mean?
So, for example, some people might hurt themselves, they might cut themselves. Folks in your position might even consider suicide. Is that something that you're thinking about?
No, I'm not considering suicide, but I am glad that you asked because I've been feeling really crappy.
Yeah, I totally understand. I'm going to write you a referral for a counselor and kind of see what he can do to help connect you with some resources, because I've definitely gone through similar times, and I think that'll be really helpful for you.
Thanks, Teach. And scene. Wonderful, marvelous. All right, so let's go back. Can we pick out any of the risk factors that teacher Heft was able to pick up on? What were some of the risk factors?
All her friends have left, her attitude.
Were there any warning signs?
Yep. Loss of interest in things once desired, in bed a lot, kind of general apathy.
And what about protective factors?
Yeah, folks are noticing the decrease in schoolwork as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I don't think I did a good job asking about your protective factors, asking about, what.
You did ask me if there was somebody I could talk to, and that's when I told you all my friends were gone.
Yeah. Okay.
See, you did it, and you did second nature. Anything else? Anything else you noticed about our role play? I will affirm you here, Cecilia, on your ability to use your active listening skills to repeat what I was saying and affirm it, like tying it to a specific feeling or thought. And I know sometimes that can be difficult when we're talking to people to label a thought or a feeling. Even if we're wrong, that person can say, oh, it's not anger, it's actually disappointment, right? So you even in doing that, you're helping people to kind of process through what's actually bugging them. So thank you for being my my teacher. And Sharif, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay. Okay, so why do you think this image, if you look at, everyone look at this, you know, close attention when you're looking at this A with all the locks, why do you think this image was chosen in connection to the theme of access to lethal means? And I know we're being mindful of time, so, you know, if you want to just kind of popcorn it really quick. So okay, feelings locked up inside, unlock oneself isn't always easy. Yes, that's a really good point. So one of the things that the creators of this training were trying to do was really triggering the thought about, actually kind of goes into lethal means, right? No worry, Brian, we're family at this point. But it's thinking about lethal means. So we're gonna kind of really talk about the access, and most households have highly lethal means that are unsecure, and being aware of lethal means and their accessibility to someone at risk of suicide is a part of comprehensive suicide prevention. So again, we have 1,000 passwords on computers and phones, but when we think about some of the means to dying by suicide, those are things that are not always secure, okay? So when we're thinking about securing it, we wanna think about the lethality of firearms is significant, right? When we talked about earlier with Nicole about the ones that are more commonly used, it is very important that putting time and distance between all lethal means and someone who's at risk for suicide, that is our purpose, right? Is to kind of put that time, remember we talked about moments to hours, where they can be going through that acute period of high risk. And so we wanna put time and distance. And as we discussed, extending that time, right, between someone who's at risk for suicide and lethal means is deeply a part of suicide prevention. So while this action doesn't change the fundamental situation for the person at risk, right? The person is still struggling with some unmet needs and maybe other risk factors that have not been handled or taken care of. It's important. This is a crucial step in reducing their risk as well as their ability to complete suicide. This is just some data that you can all kind of just look at a little bit. We wanted to point out, because this is something people are not always aware, we think a lot about guns, but poison deaths is also something that people are using. The majority of people use medications. Again, that varies depending on where you are. I know there's some countries where people will literally ingest liquid forms of different kinds of poisons, but oftentimes where we reside, we're looking at medications, and poisons account for 14% of suicide deaths in 2017, okay? And as we said, narcotics, it's more like 60% of deaths. So that's really important to also make note of. From Elaine Frank, co-creator of Counseling on Access to Lethal Means, firearms is the leading method of suicide nationally, and in Texas, they are highly lethal and often accessible in many homes. They are fast and irreversible, making the need to put time and distance between someone at risk and the lethal means critically important. Again, medications are frequently used as a method in suicide attempts, okay? So a combination of medications and the availability of it is what often makes it so popular. So we wanna start thinking about the meds that, throwing out meds that have not been, that are expired or cannot be used. As you can see, as we've said before, putting time and distance between is what really makes a difference and can truly save someone's life. While this training is not designed to equip you with these skills per se, as far as you can't really bust into someone's house, right? It's important to know the role of means, because sometimes when you're talking to someone at risk, you can be in contact with their family or their friends who can help create that distance and add more time. And then
I swear that mute button gets me every time. All right, I am going to take us through connection to care. I am going to move rapidly, but do not worry, you all are going to receive a handout with some of this same information. So I don't want it to seem too redundant, but I am going to go over it. So the final step in the ASK process is to know how and where to connect to qualified care. So there can be national, state, or local resources. And there are certain groups at elevated risk when we talked about thinking about your occupation, sexual identity, and all different parts of your identity. So here is some of the national resources that are available. Again, you are going to receive a one-pager with these resources. Here in the state of Texas, we have a crisis line and local mental health authorities line by county. We'll make sure that you also get that resource. So thinking about any healthcare providers, veteran services, faith-based communities, whichever settings work best with that person, you want to make sure that you're able to connect them with those resources. First responders are called out, but you want to also ask for a mental health officer. So MCOT is a team of professionals that are called out to assist with mental health crises. Oftentimes we want to call the police, but we know that that can be lethal for some groups. And so we want to make sure that we also have a mental health professional there in the case of someone that has a crisis. The know also stands for know what else you can do. So follow up with a person if they've shared or connected with you about wanting to die by suicide, share media guidelines, share all of your resources, because we don't want to do this in isolation. We don't want to do this in silos. We want to make sure that we're all helping each other and encouraging this knowledge for recognizing the signs and symptoms so that we're able to help people in our immediate area. By following the ASK protocol, you have the skills needed to do basic gatekeeping for suicide prevention in your community. Thank you for participating in today's workshop. And what you do is making a huge difference in your community and making it safer for the youth and for the adults. So we are at the end. Again, these resources will be given to you. We ask that you please take this evaluation. And Jamie, we will also follow up and give you in case there was anyone who needed to leave before, we can also provide the link and the QR code for the post evaluation. Was anyone able to put it inside I can put it in there if you need me to, the link. You got it? Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
And if you put the link there, hopefully you all were able to utilize the link or the QR code. With these final parting words, we believe, and the creators of this training believe, that we can make a difference in giving someone a tomorrow. So again, making sure that we are being able to be secure attachments for people, and we're equipped with the knowledge and skills to be able to help others in and around our communities. And with that, we are finished. Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharifa and Nicole. I've learned so much tonight. And so I just wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight. I know we're into 2021 and it's been a rough start so far. So thank you for joining us, and just remind you that next Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. we will have Rashida Williams who is with the Mentoring Girls. And she is going to be talking to us about how we can, mentor our young women in the age of bad girls, housewives, and frenemies, and how we kind of glorize, mean girl type things in, on TV, and then you see it on social media. So January is National Mentoring Month. So please come back and join us next week so we can learn how we can empower our young women and teach them how to be nice to each other and support each other. With that, you will receive your CPE certificate this week, and we will also attach any of the handouts that they shared tonight. So don't worry about it if you weren't able to click on those. We will do that then. And then we'll also share the link to the evaluation. So with that, I will let you all go for the evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for having us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.